I didn't really tell people that they can watch this live because nobody really ever watches them live anyway, but they can watch it afterwards.
Sure.
Cool. So, maybe we'll get started since it's 9 o'clock already. And Ted can just join us when he gets here. And the reason that I also want to record it so that I can have a full conversation with you all and not have to like take notes along the way, because we would like to write this up for our newsletter and have you all be co-authors if you're willing to do that. There's Ted. Hello, Ted.
Hey, sorry I'm running late.
That's okay. We're just in time. We're just getting started, and so I'm so glad everybody can join us. And this is our second student forum that we are doing over Google Hangouts. And this sort of whole idea behind it is just so that we can talk to each other across the country on a topic that interests us and get connected with folks. Believe it or not, so here's an interesting fact about the Student Forum. So I got matched for internship at the University of Oregon, so I'm staying right here in Oregon.
Hey, nice, congrats.
Thank you, Chuck. And the last forum that we had, there is a student on there named Carrie, and she got matched in my internship too. So now I know Carrie.
Oh, that's really cool.
From the Student Forum and we're going to be doing internship together. So you never know when we're going to get together, in live person and have this connection. So that's one of the things we hope to achieve also with the Student Forum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we can go around and introduce ourselves a little bit. So let's see, what did I write in my notes for what to talk about today? Introduction. I got to toggle my things around. Okay. Introduction, your name, university, program. Tell us a little about your research or clinical interests or whatever else you want to share about yourself.
Who wants to go first?
Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Awesome.
So my name is Elisa de Vargas, and I'm here at the University of Oregon. I'm a third year in the counseling psychology program. My research is on substance use prevention in adolescents and clinical interests. I've been focusing my clinical work on children and adolescents, and then have been doing a child and family practicum this year, which has been really fun. Yeah.
Cool.
I guess I can go next.
I can go next. I'm sorry, am I cutting some?
That's okay. You can go, Ted. Go ahead.
But my name is Ted Bartholomew. I'm one of the other.
Uh-oh. Ted, you're cutting out.
I'm in my 6th year in the counseling psych PhD program at the University of Nebraska. I'll be starting my internship at Penn State this fall, or summer rather. And my research interests are in cultural psychology and mental health. I just finished my dissertation on beliefs about.
Ted, your connection is not super great. I think.
Is it poor? I'm in my training clinic right now, so I'm down in a basement.
Can you repeat your research and clinical interests one more time for us?
Sure. So my clinical interests are with international students in the sort of integration of positive processes in therapy. But as far as research goes, I'm interested in process and outcome, but particularly cultural psychology. And my dissertation was on beliefs about mental illness and treatment. And
dang it, the best part. What was in... sorry, Ted. You cut out there at the very end again.
Let's skip over me and go on to the next person.
Ted, I'm actually interested in what that last bit about what group you were working with for your dissertation.
The Ovambo, they're the majority cultural group in Namibia.
Okay, there we go. That's helpful. So my name is Chuck Liu. I am finishing up my 4th year over at UMass Boston. It's a clinical psych program. I work with Karen Sugimoto, who does a lot of stuff on culture, Asian Americans, and mental health. Previously, I did some stuff on looking at racism as experienced by Asian Americans and the impacts on depression and anxiety. But for dissertation, I'm looking a little bit more specifically, hopefully, in the planning stages, but hopefully a little bit more among Chinese immigrants and seeing, understandings of mental illness and how that impacts utilization of services. Um, so interested in that cultural piece as well for myself.
All right, I can go next. My name is Brandon Canettle. I'm a 5th year from Lehigh University's Counseling Psychology program. I'm currently at Duke at the Counseling Center at Duke for my internship, and really loving it down here. My research is in working with international students and describing how people from different cultural groups describe the causes of mental illness and how that influences decisions about treatment. And then I also have projects kind of alive in Haiti and Tanzania as well, a program evaluation in Haiti of healthcare workers there, and kind of a general survey of the mental health system in Tanzania as well.
Sylvia?
Oh,
I can't hear.
Can't hear you, Sylvia. Uh-oh. Nothing yet, Sylvia. We can see your mouth moving.
still nothing.
Mm-mm. Darn. You could chat with us if that's if the mic isn't working. You could always type in your introduction on the side. Or maybe in the settings there might be a way for you to change your microphone. If you see on the very top where there are options, there's a settings option, the very top of the Hangout. You might be able to change your mic option and see which one you can use. I'm not sure what you're saying, Sylvia. I just tried some settings. Okay, cool. Well, maybe I can go next, and then you can join us. Oh, it doesn't work. That's so sad. So you can join us maybe by chatting and just letting us know who you are. What do you think? Okay, cool. So I'm Jenny, and I am at the University of Oregon. I'm a 5th-year student in counseling psychology, and going on internship here next year, so I'm not moving anywhere, which is nice. My research interests are in the academic resilience of underrepresented students, so that includes my research has really included international students, Chinese international students in particular, and Latino students, as well as American Indian Alaska Native students. So I have quite a broad research interest. And my clinical interests, I really love working with college students, so that's why I'm going into a college counseling center for internship. So that's me. Sylvia, you want to introduce yourself by typing it in? Sylvia, do you want to? Oh, there we go. I'm Sylvia, 2nd year counseling psych at the U of O. Clinical interests involve working with children and families, particularly from immigrant and refugees, asylum-seeking population, asylum seeker populations. Excellent. Awesome. Welcome. So, in terms of our questions, we will just do sort of popcorn style. Whoever wants to talk to, just go ahead and tell us. And then these are just guiding questions, so our conversation can go wherever. So tell us a little bit about your interests in researching or practicing abroad. Which countries are you interested in? What draws you to work outside of the U.S.? Those are 3 different questions. Oh, and Sylvia says, my research interests are still evolving, but hopefully something similar. Cool.
I guess I can just start off. I guess working, so my main interests, as I mentioned, are working with Asian Americans, and specifically Chinese Americans, and just given the nature of immigration patterns, a significant portion of the Asian American population have immigrant backgrounds, right? And so, obviously, simply by coming to the U.S., they don't get rid of all of their cultural beliefs. So me working internationally. My desire to work internationally is actually one is linguistically the need to be able to speak the language of a lot of the people living in the U.S., a lot of Asian Americans, or specifically Chinese Americans living in the U.S., and then also to understand a little bit of the cultural context from which they came. Even though I grew up in an immigrant family, it's probably a little bit different as a later life immigrant than my own experience as a immigrant as a child. So that's sort of my hope down the road, is to sort of straddle the 2 different worlds, be able to do some work stateside, and also just sort of acknowledging the huge need that there is overseas. If I'm linguistically and culturally competent stateside, then I'm sure some of that will translate to being able to work with populations overseas as well.
Yeah, I've kind of had a really similar experience. I know some people have said that being kind of in the United States, finding ways to kind of continue that international interest, and we'll probably get into the point that it's been a little bit hard to find opportunities and time to travel abroad. So I noticed that several people mentioned interest in working with immigrant and refugee populations, and I think that that's a great way for us to kind of stay involved, obviously, and to keep our multicultural work up, and to find ways to kind of incorporate that into our work. So for me, yeah, that came in the form of working with refugee populations in Philly during my time at Lehigh, and so that's been a nice addition to my experience internationally as well.
Sorry, my wife is apparently brooming behind me.
That is all right. I guess I can talk a little bit about my interests. I'm also an immigrant. I came here when I was 10 years old, so have always had some desires of understanding how my training in psychology here would actually apply internationally, and whether that's in China or somewhere else. My partner also is really interested. He's always been very interested in international affairs, and so lately we've been talking about, after I graduate, maybe we can go and live abroad, live somewhere like in Singapore or New Zealand. We're kind of dreaming big. And as I'm looking into jobs in Singapore, New Zealand, and India, and so on, I realized that there just really is nothing in my training that would teach me how to practice abroad, or how do I, if I want to teach abroad, if I want to do research abroad. I don't know how translatable my training would be, and how much barriers there will be in terms of finding a network of folks there, whether my training prepares me well to do international work, to work in a different language and a different culture. And my own Chinese language is not that great anymore. It's probably at a middle school level. So, and I've learned all of my psychology terms in English, and so I think there's a lot of barriers there too. And I don't think that there's much in this is my own opinion in my program that has in terms of support or connections in those countries to help me make that bridge over. I'll read for Sylvia. She says she loved to combine domestic and international work as well. I'm personally from Moldova. Am I pronouncing that right? Former Soviet Union, and Russian was my first language. I came here at age 3, so working with Russian-speaking populations would be nice. And I have that personal cultural background. Also, I've traveled to Central and South America a bunch of times, and I'm fluent in Spanish. And my partner is from Ecuador, so I'm also really interested in working with Latinos both here and abroad. Awesome. Oh, and she says, my language skills are okay, but I also don't know many psychology terms in anything but English.
I think that's certainly a concern for a lot of people, but I don't know, from my work in the refugee community, I've learned that more community arts and maybe non-traditional therapies are probably ideal anyway, honestly, that kind of art programs and things like that tend to work much better than traditional individual or group psychotherapy. And I lived in Tanzania for a year between my master's and PhD and found similar things there that, you really don't need the psychological terms so much when you're just sitting with people and forming some fellowship and kind of just like having an opportunity for community and kind of building connection and creating kind of existing skills. And so the language barrier wasn't the extent that I thought it might be initially, so that was kind of helpful. But I would agree that it's been really hard since starting my PhD to find opportunities and time and resources to go abroad that I feel pretty invested in a lot of the work that I'm doing here in the States, which makes it hard to kind of add on that or maintain the international component.
I agree with you, Brandon. I've been working quite a bit with Spanish-speaking populations and have found that I've been fortunate in that I have supervision opportunities here at the university, and so that helps with some of the learning of jargon in Spanish. But when you're actually working with clients and people out in the community, that language doesn't really make sense to them, and so you have to find a way of relating to them in a different manner. And I find that in English-speaking clients as well, especially lower income, minority populations, and so I like that you brought that up, Brandon. For me, I've done some work internationally, and I'm hoping that I can, in the future, use those connections to continue doing research internationally. My research focus is on substance use prevention, and I come from New Mexico, which is a minority-majority state. And so we have a lot of Latino adolescents and a large population of Latinos that are not immigrants, but also we have a lot of Mexican immigrants in New Mexico. And so I feel like having the understanding of cultural aspects and cultural values from the opposite side of the border is really beneficial to working with those clients. And so the connections that I have are in Mexico City and in Puebla, Mexico. And so I'm hoping that I can continue to learn a little bit more about what is going on down there and be able to work on some projects that are transnational so that we can use that information for the services that we offer here, as well as maybe help develop some programs in Mexico as well.
How about you, Ted?
Hopefully I won't cut out too much, but I got involved with international research when I was an undergrad. I had a professor developmental psych research there, and I was her RA as an undergrad. And when I finished my undergrad years, my bachelor's, I went over to Namibia with her to do some research that summer, and I guess as cheesy as that can sound, but and so I had always had this
Oh no, Ted, you're cutting out.
health and mental illness and looking at different ideas and ways of conceptualizing it. So certainly looking at language and terms, but really looking more at the source and etiology, I guess, of illness and treatment. And they're collecting data and doing a lot of embedded sort of field work, I guess, which is something that was really interesting for me. But then obviously as a grad student I don't always have time to travel, so being here in the United States I focused a lot on doing refugee research very similarly to what other folks are saying, and just really being driven to understand different ways of seeing mental health and mental illness and the ways that psychologists can interact with folks outside of individual and group therapy.
Great, thanks. So I think we've already started to talk a little bit about this. So about if you already have had clinical and research experience abroad, what are those experiences? So it sounds like for some of you it's tied to your advisor's work, and for some of you it's more that you've initiated those experiences and have sought them out. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about, how did you seek out those experiences? Did you face challenges and barriers in terms of that work? And if you're currently seeking out international connections and work, what kind of challenges and barriers are you facing?
I haven't done too much overseas since I started my program. When I was in college, I actually did a 6-month internship in China, working with an NGO that did essentially. I mean, they did lots of different things, but the project that I was working on was doing sex ed with university students. And so there was a component of that which was psychoeducation, but I think from that and the network of people that put me in contact with, that really has given me a lot of potential opportunities, even if I haven't had the opportunity to take them. There's people who I've met during my time there who are doing specifically mental health related stuff, or working in different sorts of communities in China that, because I had that initial experience, I'm now able to say, hey, even though this was like, I don't know, 2007, how many years ago? Almost 10 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, like, this is something that I remember we talked about when we were there. Remember me, is there anything that we could potentially work out? And so, in some ways, keeping those conversations alive, and for me, there aren't too many. My program isn't going to send me overseas, right? And so, really, what it comes down to is trying to find the bits and pieces that I can do here stateside, to sort of keep me engaged in the cultural type pieces and the linguistic pieces, to sort of work on my Chinese, and then to at some point down the road call up some of those contacts. Like for instance, in the APA at Hawaii, I met a psychologist who was teaching in Beijing, right? And so, I was just kind of like, hey, let's go out to lunch. I'd love to hear what it is that you do. And recently, I've been trying to figure out opportunities to go overseas. I sent her an email, and she was like, oh yeah, I remember. So it's like having those types of personal connections that kind of facilitate the possibilities.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point, Chuck, about networking and how important it is to utilize the resources that we have just at conferences or in our programs through advisors or other faculty. The experience that I had abroad was through a research program at the University of Southern California. They take a group of students every summer to Mexico and conduct research there. I heard about the program from my roommate at the time. Both of us applied, and I was accepted into the program. And I actually was fortunate to have an advisor who did her postdoc with the PI of the research program. And so that, I think, gave me a little bit of an edge in terms of getting accepted into the program. But initially, they put me on a waiting list because they didn't have enough funding to offer everybody positions. And so I didn't think I was going to be able to go. And 2 weeks before we headed out to Mexico, they let us know and booked our flights. And I spent 8 weeks there in the summer after my first year. And so I think one of the things that was hard about it was I think sometimes it can be a little bit unexpected where the funding is going to come from, and you have to be a little bit creative about how you look for the opportunities, because there are definitely programs out there that will offer, full basically stipends and travel, because that was the case in my experience. But it does help to know people who have previously done it or have other connections to find those opportunities. Like I said, I did that research in Mexico City, and the main group of researchers were in Puebla. And it's really nice because we were located in a university setting that was focused on psychiatry, and so we got to kind of get a tour of the institution, see what other research was going on there, and then work with a specific researcher on an individualized program. So the research that I did over there was focusing on young girls who were born in the U.S. But whose parents had been deported from the U.S. back into Mexico, and the girls migrated back to Mexico with their parents after the deportation. And so we were interviewing them. It was a qualitative study about their experiences both here in the U.S., crossing the border back into Mexico, and then assimilating back into Mexican culture. So I think that was a pretty unique opportunity, and I'm really grateful for it. And like I said, I'm hoping that I can continue utilizing those connections in the future. The mentor that I worked with had a couple of transnational studies going on, and so there are some researchers here in the U.S. who have good connections with those institutes down in Mexico. And then fortunately, my dad actually has connections with people in California, and I learned that they were also doing research in Mexico City. And so I think it's really important to keep in mind who you know, and also not be afraid to reach out to those people and see what kind of opportunities you can get involved with.
Yeah, I would agree that that networking piece is just so valuable and so important. The Haiti project actually kind of just fell into our laps. We had a rich alumna who was now working for a major health company and wanted to do some evaluation for a project they were doing with some of their, they were sending volunteers abroad to do this work in Haiti and wanted to evaluate the program, and so they just got in touch with Lehigh and were able to kind of find a couple of students through our programs who had a statistical background and public health background. So I paired up with somebody from the Comparative International Education Master's Program, and we were able to go abroad for 3 weeks and do the project and get some research involved and get a publication out of it. So it was a really neat opportunity for us. And now, year after year, we're actually passing it down the line. So new students are coming along, becoming the interns, and then we're taking on more of a leadership role and kind of helping them through the process. And so I think if you can form those connections, it's something that can actually stay in your program for years and get passed down through students who have the interest in international work. So that's been really cool for us.
Very cool. I'm going to read Sylvia's remarks. Oh, by the way, Ted had to leave because he had to run a little bit early to administer a final, right? So their terms are coming to an end. So Sylvia says, most of my international work so far has been before starting my program and mostly service-related. Semester abroad in Ghana with a lot of community service, volunteering in Peru for a few months, other shorter experiences. I've been wanting to do some international research since starting my program, but biggest challenges so far are planning and funding. I wanted to start some kind of international research project myself, but it seemed too daunting at that point last year when I was in my first year of my program. Now I'm trying to link up with a UO professor from a different department, Charles Martinez, who does international work in Central America. But he also can't fund me. Sad face, at least at this point. In the future, once I have a better idea of the project he's working on, I'm hoping to propose an idea of my own within that and apply for funding. Very cool. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with all of you in terms of your experiences. I haven't yet done really anything abroad, but there are some really interesting connections that I've made at conferences that I haven't yet tapped into. But for example, the past chair of the international section, D.C. Wong, I don't know if you all know him. He's a professor in Texas, forgetting which university. But DC has, he was an international student, so came here as an international student from China to study counseling psychology, and so he had maintained a lot of his connections in China, and so he had taken a student group, I believe it's mostly undergrads, but he also took his graduate students as well to China the last couple of summers. So Chuck, maybe that's somebody that you can get connected with. But he would go there, and it's mostly kind of like a summer class for the undergrads to understand, I think, China and maybe mental health in China. But his graduate students also do research there in the summertime as well. So it's I think it's a pretty cool program. He had offered for me to come along with him one summer, but I think I just didn't make that work. I had a job here at the U of O that I couldn't take time off of. So there are opportunities out there, and I also know that UC Berkeley, they have this connection with universities in China where they are bringing counselors, I believe from Shanghai, bringing them to Berkeley to do this sort of international exchange program of like practitioners to practitioners, where they really work with these college counselors from China to introduce them to the counseling services at Berkeley, and then these counselors then also go to China to understand the counseling services in China. So it's a really cool like practitioner exchange program. And I know some folks there, and I haven't really connected with them either. So there are definitely some really cool opportunities out there that I've gotten to know just through conferences and through divisions and things like that. But really want to be on the lookout for other opportunities. I haven't yet met any practitioners from, say, Singapore or India or any other places that we want to move to. But I also know that those countries also have really robust psychological associations of their own. So getting connected with that, I think that would be really important. Let's see. In terms of challenges, have you met any challenges in translating your training or translating even your language that you gained here in the U.S. to other cultures that you have worked with? I think I think Brandon had already mentioned sometimes language doesn't matter as much, but have you faced any challenges in terms of your work abroad in terms of cultural adaptation or language adaptation?
Elisa, were you going to say something?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think it's obviously a huge component, right? Because we all know that language is not just about translation; it's about how ideas and concepts and constructs are understood. So language is a huge part of culture and affects the way that we understand things. And so that simple translation, dictionary translation from Western psychological concepts don't necessarily even like Jenny, like when we talk about like emotion words, right? Like those emotions don't translate in black and white terms from English to Chinese in the same way. And so language is a huge challenge for myself. Speaking conversationally at home is different than needing to talk to clients. And so it's one of those things where like I feel like even if I'm not overseas, I can still do things to work on my language ability. So I'm working in a place that gets a few Chinese-speaking clients in. So some of my caseload are Chinese-speaking. I do some in-home therapy work with Chinese families, which is kind of neat as well. And then oftentimes my supervisor is also Chinese-speaking, which is also really helpful. And I actually recently just started. I set up a online. I didn't set it up. There's a language school. There's lots of language schools in China, but a specific language school that I have set up to do one-on-one Skype lessons to sort of work on my Chinese, both in terms of like reading and writing. And I let them know that I have an emphasis in wanting to be able to do therapy in Chinese. So as sort of I bring my skills up a little bit, hopefully then we can start integrating some of the psychology specific or just like emotion specific language into my studying. So that's kind of my experience going into it.
So for me, I'm not sure if some of the challenges that I faced when I was in Mexico were acclimating myself to the culture there in terms of how they do research and how they run research projects there, because it was pretty different from here in the United States. And so there were a couple of moments throughout the summer that I was in Mexico where I ran into kind of bumped up against some of the people that I was working with. Mexico is a much more laid-back culture, and so I was wanting deadlines and quick responses to emails, and that was not happening. So I had to be a little bit patient with the people that I was working and really try to check my own cultural norms and realize that I was in a different place and adapt to that. Since I've been back, some of the barriers that I found have not been so much in translating the work, because there are several journals that will publish things in Spanish, and translating Spanish to English is I think a little bit I'm not sure if you all would agree, but maybe a little bit easier than some other translating from some other languages. And I'm fortunate that there are a lot of groups, different associations from APA and other psychological associations that focus on Latino work. So that's kind of helpful. The barriers that I've run into are the mentor that I was working with in Mexico was co-PI on the project, and so she did not have all the rights to publications, and the other researchers with whom she's working have kind of pushed against me disseminating the work that I did there. So I haven't, I presented at a conference. I was invited to publish, but then got some pushback from the researchers here in the States. I think there was some lack of communication between my mentor in Mexico and her co-PIs here in the US, and so they weren't really aware of what my role was, weren't aware that I was going to be presenting, and so I've had some trouble there. And I've expressed some of the challenges and some of the concerns that I've had with the professor from California to let him know about some of, because for the program that I was in, there were requirements about us, writing up a manuscript and presenting at conferences based on our research, and it didn't seem like those requirements were clearly expressed to the research group where in Mexico City. And so hopefully in the future, students who do research with that group will have better luck than I did. The group is in the process. They completed their data collection and are hopefully going to publish soon, so I'll be a co-author. But the goal of the research program was to have the students who were involved be first authors on manuscripts, and so I'll probably be at the bottom of a list of like 4 or 5 authors, which is fine. But it's been a little bit of a challenge, disseminating the work that I did specifically, and so yeah.
I guess for me, talking about translation issues specifically, in Tanzania, I was learning Kiswahili at the time that I was there, and so I just didn't feel like I was at the level where I was able to kind of do my research in Swahili, and so I was learning a lot about kind of translation procedures and just understanding what a huge commitment of time and energy and resources it is to translate right and kind of put that work in, and so I was a little more prepared when I went to Haiti and did the same thing, and knew absolutely no Creole, so relied 100% on our translators for all of our focus groups and all of our research. And so again, just a huge commitment. And so I love the work that I've done abroad. I think it's really provided some of my most rewarding work. But it's also, that added translation and back translation and, translating measures and then translating everything, throughout the program and communicating the research protocol to the participants and everything has been a major commitment and challenge. So I understand why it's in place, and I'm glad that those procedures have been formalized in that way. But it really does create a lot of barriers to creating as much output in your research as you might working in English.
Great, thank you all. Sylvia, do you have anything to add? Oh, there we go. As I mentioned, my language skills in both Russian and Spanish are fine conversationally, and that's comforting to know from all of you that clinically it doesn't seem like it'll be much of an issue. Definitely for research, I anticipate having to learn a lot more specialized language than I know now. Very cool.
So I was going to add something. One thing that I was fortunate to have with the program that I participated in was the opportunity to work. Well, it was a research program specifically, and it was pretty well established. And so some of the we had a few opportunities to attend lectures, and then also just engaging in everyday language with researchers only in Spanish. So I was fortunate to have some of the terminology translated for me, and picked up the research language that I needed to for in Spanish. So that was really nice. It's pretty different. The translations for like collecting data is in Spanish is like lifting data, so it's like levantando datos, and so that's not something that would have been straightforward to me. And so I was lucky that I had people guiding me, and then like I said, the everyday interactions where we were only speaking in Spanish was really nice way of introducing me to the culture of research in Latin-speaking culture. I mean, Spanish-speaking culture.
That's awesome. You know, that also reminds me of when I was doing the research with Chinese international students. We were doing it based off of Claude Steele's stereotype threat. And the interesting thing is that there is no such word as stereotype in Chinese. So it's really interesting to try to translate that and try to explain that idea. So definitely there are some interesting things that we find when we try to do work in another culture. Anything else?
Oh, I was going to say, Sylvia, just to clarify, I wasn't necessarily saying that clinically it doesn't seem like it'll be much of an issue. I've actually found it to be really challenging to go from basic conversational Chinese to therapeutic Chinese, just because, yeah, there's just so much thinking and like translating that goes on in my head, and then you run up against, you realize that you don't know how to say a term that you think would be really easy to say, and then you get all awkward and flustered. And so at least in my experience, I have to have a high tolerance threshold for sounding really awful to be able to get across my point.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Yeah, I think the Kiswahili that I was able to learn very early on was kind of which direction to the market, and how do I catch this bus, and the language that you learn in your first experiences tends to be very, very different than the language you use in an academic setting versus a medical setting versus a counseling setting. So I would totally agree that it's a different vocabulary entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I end up sounding something like a second grader trying to do therapy, where it's just it might be strange for the client to experience that level of language talking about serious issues, but it is what it is.
Chuck, have you found that with Chinese clients that they tend to help you out a little bit when you're struggling to find a word?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll also give me really strange quizzical looks when I think I'm saying something and it's totally not what I mean to be saying. But they'll let me know when that happens. I think they're gracious enough to sort of help me out and let me know when they don't get something.
Yeah, I find the same with my Spanish-speaking clients, and because I've done research here in the States with Spanish-speaking clients as well as clinical work, and the nice thing is that you can always rely on the clients, even in English. If you say something wrong, if you reflect an emotion incorrectly, they're going to correct you. So that's been kind of my default is like, okay, if they don't understand me, they're going to let me know, and then I'm going to have to figure out a new way of saying it. But I think one of the things that I often struggle with is I want to say things the way I say them in English. Like one day I was trying to figure out how to say triggers, emotional triggers in Spanish, and the way it translates, well, I didn't know a word for it in Spanish, so I had to think of how can I describe a trigger to somebody in Spanish, and that was really challenging. I don't think I did a very good job of it. But then when I looked it up later, there really wasn't a way of translating it. What it was translating was more to like a gun trigger and like a shooting. And so I'm like, okay, if I would have used the direct translation, that would have been really horrible. So it takes a bit of creativity and kind of trial and error as well, and relying on clients to kind of help you out with some of the colloquial ways of describing things, as well as maybe offering some support when you're struggling, just to find a typical word that you have in your vocabulary but just can't think of in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is great. It's so interesting that we can share all of these experiences with each other. So a couple of other questions that we had in mind is what kind of support, I'm just going to ask them all at once and you can answer them because we only have about 7 more minutes left. You can answer whatever that you want to answer. So what kind of support have you received, either from your faculty members or mentors or role models in your work abroad? So that includes financial support, letters of recommendation, or networking. And also, what do you see as some of your or some of the unmet needs for students who want to work abroad?
You know, my advisor is really awesome and really great, but her area of specialty is really in Asian Americans, and specifically Asian Americans, right? And so, you know, she'll support my work working with Asian American immigrants, but she really won't support my work doing international work, which is, you know, completely understandable. She doesn't feel like it's her expertise. That's not what she is interested in, etc. So in some ways, like, that's stuff that I have to foster by myself. And you know, it's really great that there's a significant overlap between Asian immigrants and work that you would do, you know, with you know, overseas Asians. But there hasn't been a lot of support for transnational type work or international work from myself, and I kind of feel as though, you know, once I get my you know, dissertation done that has to do with Asian Americans specifically, then I can sort of, if I want to go down that direction, do more work in the international area. In terms of funding, I mean, I hear that again and again, like from all of you guys as well, is that it's really difficult to get funding or to take the time out when we're in our super busy programs to do any sort of international work. I was mentioning to Jenny earlier that I was lucky enough to get a fellowship through APA that sort of allows me a good amount of freedom to do stuff. So hopefully that will give me some opportunity to head overseas and spend a small chunk of time at least, and doing work and also working on language study. But you know, some of it might also just have to do with, like, I don't know, going a summer without pay or something, you know? It's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, it really does seem that if you're able to stay within your faculty or your advisor's kind of research program, that you're always going to have better luck in that way. That you're going to get a little bit more logistical support, a little bit more support in taking time off, and that's really been my experience too. That unfortunately, the Haiti project was something that was presented to me by one of the faculty members, and so I got a lot of freedom, I think, in that regard. And she was also my prac advisor at the time, so I was able to take 3 weeks off to go there, and that was really helpful too. So working within those confines is really important. Yeah, I've had the same experience that when I've tried to go outside that, I've had to make some sacrifices in other areas, or I've really had to kind of do a lot of planning ahead of time, either financially and really talking to various people and making sure that they were on board before I was able to do it. So yeah, that's really been my experience also.
Nice to hear that. Sylvia says, I have similar experience with my advisor who hasn't been very supportive about international research. Jenny and Elisa can understand, I think. We all have the same advisor. I have had to seek out outside opportunities as well. Yeah, it's true. I mean, even though our advisor has supported another student who has gone abroad on a Fulbright to do her dissertation in Spain, that overall, I think it takes a lot of your own initiative in order to seek out opportunities like that, definitely.
Yeah, when I went abroad, I've had two different advisors throughout my time here at the University of Oregon, and I started out with one advisor for my first year and a half or so, and then I switched over to the current advisor that I have right now. I think, so thinking about what other people have said, the demands of our programs don't make it an ideal setting, an ideal time for us to do international work. So for me, when I timed my time abroad pretty strategically. I went the summer of my first year, and if I had waited any longer, I don't think I would have been able to do it just because of the demands of the program. But first year, while it was a difficult year, it wasn't as intense as the rest of the years, and I felt like the summertime, we don't have funding over the summer through our program, and this was my way of actually having an income in the summer. So I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to do a research program that did offer funding. There was, they covered the travel, and we had a stipend, and then a wage for on top of the stipend, we had a wage for our housing and food. So we were pretty spoiled through the program that I was in, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. But had I waited any longer, I don't think I would have been able to do it, just because of the demands of the program. And I think that for me, I spent my whole winter break of first year applying to tons and tons of scholarships, not only for the international work that I did, but just for funding for the following year. And it took my whole break. And once you start working on your thesis or dissertation, then that takes up your breaks. And so it's really hard, and you have to be really determined about what you want to do, and kind of manage your time wisely so that you can fit in the time to put in the applications, and be okay with potentially not getting the opportunities that you're applying for.
Yeah, I thank you. All. I just want to recognize that it is 10 o'clock, and I don't want to take up more time than you have to commit to this conversation, but I also really appreciate all the thoughts that you all have. So I think the next step for us is for Ted and I to try to summarize our conversation into an article, and we will then send around a draft to you all for your additional thoughts, and for you to put in more thoughts if you want to into the article that you haven't shared today. And in particular, I think some of the programs that you mentioned, if you want to add their actual names or information about that, that would be wonderful for the article. But we also hope to continue this conversation too, just because I think it's so important for us to get together as students to talk about our experiences and to get some ideas from each other. And so we'll think about other ways that we can connect again, either another student forum or some other way. Maybe we can get together at a future APA conference or something like that, where we can, have a conversation or a roundtable hour where we can do that. So just want to say, any final thoughts before we end today?
Just wanted to say thanks for organizing, and thanks for the invitation. It was really great to hear from you all and hear what some of you guys are doing. Really exciting stuff, and always cool to just share the experience of like-minded folks who are doing similar things.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of echo that and say thank you for, those of you who put this on and for sharing some of your experiences.
Ditto, and it was nice meeting all of you and hearing about the really cool experiences that you've all had.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your time. And yeah, again, hopefully we'll reconnect. You never know when our path will cross again, and maybe in the future we'll have a whole panel and talk. We'll have all of us talk about our experiences since we've been a student and what we've done in our professional lives, and hopefully we'll be opening some doors for future students to do work abroad too. So thank you, and yeah, we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jenny.
Mhm.